Tonight's episode, The Endangered Species.
That was a video I made in 2012. Let's watch it live.
Today we are going to talk about guns, specifically pistols, and more specifically inexpensive pocket pistols made in the Los Angeles area. There's a lot to learn about these highly politicized handguns. Many millions are made, and they often show up as the villains in mass media coverage of firearms or crime. Since they are simple designs, crudely made, and offer few extras other firearms offer, many shooters shy away from these, because they do not hold up well to heavy range or recreational use. So not surprisingly, while researching it was difficult to find much open-minded coverage or discussion about these firearms. We will look at some of the relationships between the firearms, the people that build them, their companies, and other factors that make up this complicated and interesting facet of United States firearms history. As a disclaimer, all of our research was done online in an honest attempt to better understand firearms history here in the U.S. It's not an attempt to offer legal advice. We offer this strictly for educational and entertainment purposes. We need to begin where much firearms research begins, with the great John Moses Browning. Of course, entire books have been written about him, and we'll still need many more to cover all the inventions and ideas he left us with. The few that we'll concentrate on here will be the 25 ACP cartridge and his vest pocket pistols. At the turn of the last century, Browning decided it was time for the 25 auto, and so it became. In 1905, he invented the cartridge and the pistol to go along with it, the FN Model 1906, and soon after the U.S. version, the Colt Model 1908. These very popular pocket pistols have a history of their own, as they are each over 100 years old. These were invented to meet a demand, and they did so successfully for over a century, and many other small pistols followed. This is where our story begins, but now we'll stop and take a look in another direction towards United States firearms law. In 1968, the Gun Control Act was passed. It became the third largest federal firearms policy, surpassed only by the 1934 NFA, and of course the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The GCA became Title I of the U.S. federal firearms law, and the NFA became Title II. This is essentially U.S. federal law that regulates the firearms industry. It does this by regulating interstate commerce and prohibiting any transfers of firearms across state lines unless through a licensed dealer. The GCA also added a sporting purposes qualifier, which regulated the importation of certain firearms. The Gun Control Act of 1968 is also where we get the 10 restrictions on firearms ownership, along with the creation of the FFL licensing system, requirement for serial numbers on firearms, prohibitions on age, direct ordering, and even the assembly of firearms. But the part of the 1968 Gun Control Act that we will concentrate on here for purposes of this research is the ATF Form 4590. The 4590 is the importation guideline that limits what types of firearms can be brought into the United States for resale. Let's take a closer look at that form. This is the actual factoring criteria for any handgun being imported into the United States. The column on the left is for pistols, the column on the right is for revolvers. Each firearm must meet enough characteristics deemed necessary by the 1968 Gun Control Act to reach a total of 75 points on the chart. If a firearm cannot meet these criteria, it's not able to be imported. Now, looking even closer at the criteria for importing a pistol, you'll see that there's only a possible 100 or so points if you count everything on the list, which means there are only about 25 points worth of characteristics that can be adjusted in order for a firearm to qualify. And if you look even closer at the math, a pistol with a caliber less than 9mm automatically loses 10 points, and if it's a single action, it loses another 10. So as you can see, it's all but impossible for a simple small caliber pocket pistol to be imported with these restrictions in place. And many people suggest that's how it was designed to be. Now, without debating on other topics here, we'll concentrate on the repercussions of its passage, the decrease in supply of small pocket pistols here in the U.S. Now the conditions had been set in place with federal legislation. How did the free market react? A Detroit police captain in the 1960s named them Saturday Night Specials. Characterized by low cost, small size, and light caliber, these low-end firearms have been the target of anti-gun organizations as well as most mainstream news and media since the 1960s and 70s. Since these firearms are on the low end of the spectrum, they don't get much respect, attention, or even defense from firearms enthusiasts either. Now, the first wave of these low-end handguns were the subject of great debate and news coverage in the early 60s, and those early Saturday night specials were mostly imported from Europe until importation was halted in 1968. While there were many new U.S.-made Saturday night specials being built around the country to fill the demand, far more were made in Los Angeles than anywhere else. An emergency room doctor and anti-gun crusader in the LA area coined the phrase "ring of fire" to describe his displeasure about the many firearms manufacturers located within an hour of downtown Los Angeles. Let's take a closer look at these ring of fire manufacturers on a map of LA in the order they came to be. At first glance, it seems like a lot of companies, because there are a lot of them, and it may seem a little complicated because many of them have operated from more than one location. We have truly just scratched the surface of a very elaborate and interesting history of the people, companies, and firearms of the Ring of Fire. Let's go a little deeper and look at it from a different direction. Everything started in 1970 with Raven Arms and its founder, George Jennings. In 1978, his son Bruce left Raven Arms to create his own company called Jennings Firearms. Bruce designed a smaller pistol based off his father's Raven P25, but scaled it down for the smaller .22 long rifle. Both companies existed, selling inexpensive firearms without directly competing with each other. Then in 1982, George Jennings' daughter, Gail, and his office manager at Raven Arms, Jim Davis, who were married, started their own company called Davis Industries. They created another version of the Raven P25, this time scaled up for the .32 ACP, later the .380. They also manufactured some inexpensive Derringers designed by George Jennings. They all built similar pistols, but each company had its own share of the market, and they each sold a lot of firearms. In 1984, the one and only improvement was made to the Raven P25, and the new model, MP25, continued to be the one pistol Raven made until the factory burned down in 1991. The AMT backup was also introduced in 1984. The AMT was always included with the Ring of Fire manufacturers, but was totally independent of Raven Arms, the Jennings family, and they built their firearms differently. In 1987, Jim Davis' brother, John, who had worked at both Raven Arms and Davis Industries, started his own company called Sedco. However, he was not in business very long and was sued by both Jennings and his brother, and he still went out of business. In 1985, divorce and possible legal issues led George's son Bruce to restructure his business, and Bryco Arms was created. In 1988, George Jennings' nephew started Sundance Industries with an upgraded version of his uncle's MP25, this time with a grip safety and a laser sight. In 1989, one of Bruce Jennings' old friends, Jim Waldorf, started Lorcin Engineering, which was the first direct competition with the Raven and its hybrids. Jim Waldorf hired Jim Davis' brother John from Sedco. In 1991, the Raven Arms factory burned down, George Jennings retired, and a new company called Phoenix Arms was created by his family to continue building the MP25 as the Raven model. In 1998, Jim Davis started Republic Arms and built a new .45 ACP pistol with a polymer frame. Only a few were made, and the company soon went out of business. In 1999, Jim Waldorf started Standard Arms with his first version of a polymer frame pistol, and it did not succeed very well. Later in 2000, he started Talon Industries with another model of a polymer frame. In 2001, Cobra Industries bought the tooling and rights to build the Davis Industries pistols and Derringers. Cobra continues to build them to this day. In 2004, Jimenez Arms was created by Paul Jimenez, who was the general manager of Bryco Arms. JA bought the tooling and rights to the Bryco Arms, the Jennings line, and still manufactures those to this day. At first glance, this might seem fairly complicated, but you'll always have this chart to help map it out. One of the reasons the Ring of Fire manufacturers are so interesting is the number of ways one can look at the relationships between them. Let's take another run through this chart, this time from another perspective. George Jennings created Raven Arms. His son Bruce created Jennings Firearms. George's daughter Gail and her husband Jim Davis created Davis Industries. AMT was not part of the family, but made a comparable product, so it's often included. Sedco was started by Jim Davis' brother, who worked at both Raven Arms and Davis Industries, and would later work for Jim Waldorf at Lorcin Engineering. When George's son Bruce got divorced from his wife Janice, Bryco Arms was created and run by Janice. The Bryco Arms pistols were distributed by Bruce at Jennings Firearms. Stephen Jennings was George Jennings' nephew. Stephen started Sundance Industries. His firearms were also distributed by Bruce at Jennings Firearms. Now, Bruce Jennings' high school friend, Jim Waldorf, started Lorcin Engineering, and while technically not related to the Jennings, Lorcin and its products were a major part of the Ring of Fire phenomenon. When the Raven Arms factory burned down, Phoenix Arms was created, and while it's not clear, research indicates that Phoenix Arms is now owned by many of George Jennings' extended family. Republic Arms was the first attempt made at a polymer frame pistol by Jim Davis, George's son-in-law, while Standard Arms and Talon Industry were Jim Waldorf's ventures into polymer frame pistols. After lawsuits closed down Davis Industries, Cobra Industries bought their equipment and rights to continue their firearm lines. Similarly, when lawsuits threatened Bryco Arms, Jimenez Arms was formed to carry on the Bryco Jennings lines. Most reporting of the Ring of Fire manufacturers will describe this close-knit extended family business structure as inbreeding, coercion, collusion, and worse. So it's difficult to truly understand the course of events throughout those years. However, it is possible to chart them as we've done here. But now let's get back to the guns. Let's get rid of the dates, and this time, let's concentrate on the lineages. The Ring of Fire pistols can all trace their roots to the P25, which had only one major design in its 20 years and 2 to 3 million pistol production run. When the Raven Arms factory burned down, Phoenix Arms rose from the ashes, and the M&P 25 lived on as the Raven model from Phoenix Arms. The first major branch in the lineage from the Raven P25 is Bruce's Jennings J25, a slimmed-down version of his father's pistol designed for the .22 long rifle. The next branch in the family tree are the Davis Industries models, which are the Raven pistol beefed up for the larger .32 ACP and .380 ACP cartridges. Sundance Industries pistols are an upgraded Raven MP25 with grip safeties and laser sights. Bryco Arms eventually made their versions of the MP25 for Jennings Firearms, which lives on today as the JA25 from Jimenez Arms, as do some of the other Bryco models. Davis Industries firearms live on today as Cobra Industries models. And since we don't have the entire catalog from each company to work with here on the screen, we'll just mention that this is just the tip of the iceberg when you get into the technical details of how these pistols operate. The lineages of these inexpensive pistols really ties them together in complex ways. Now let's focus on each of the companies and what makes them unique in the Ring of Fire story. We know that Raven Arms was the original, founded by George Jennings, an aerospace engineer, who saw an open market for inexpensive firearms artificially caused by a Gun Control Act of 1968. He created the Raven Arms P25, a 25 ACP pocket pistol, and with that began the story of the Ring of Fire manufacturers. Jennings Firearms was the next company to be created by George's son, Bruce Jennings. He scaled down the Raven P25 to .22 long rifle. Jennings Firearms has a long and complicated history of name changes, multiple locations, and eventually becoming a distributor rather than a manufacturer. Davis Industries, which was run by George Jennings' daughter and son-in-law Jim Davis. Jim had worked with George at Raven Arms as his office manager. Davis Industries pistols are scaled-up versions of the Raven P25 for use with larger calibers. While Davis Industries was one of the most prolific producers of inexpensive pocket pistols in the U.S., throughout the 80s and 90s, he was also a target of lawsuits, and like many of the Ring of Fire manufacturers, he was all but sued out of existence. Arcadia Machine and Tool, or AMT, was no relations to the Jennings family, but it was in close proximity and made a similar product, so it has always been included with the Ring of Fire phenomenon. However, the AMT product line included many firearms that had no similarity to Saturday Night Specials. AMT was eventually sold and resold, and now some of their models are available through High Standard. Calwesco is an interesting facet of the story and one that makes understanding the relationships between the companies more difficult. In 1985, Bruce Jennings divorced his second wife, Janice, after a domestic violence incident. Because a domestic violence arrest and put a federal firearms license in jeopardy, Bruce decided to reorganize his company to avoid potential complications. Calwesco was created and run by Gene Johnson, the office manager for Jennings Firearms. While it's difficult to research the specifics, the new company, Calwesco, and later Bryco, were the manufacturers for Jennings Firearms, which eventually became a distributor instead of a manufacturer. In 1987, John Davis created Sedco Industries. John had worked at Raven Arms as a machine operator, then left to work with his brother Jim when he created Davis Industries. The brothers did not get along well, and John left to start Citgo, creating a 22 caliber pistol designed to compete with the Jennings J22. However, Citgo only lasted a short time as John was sued by the Jennings family and his own brother. Later, John would work for Lorcin Engineering. In 1988, or some sources say 1992, Bryco Arms was created to build guns for Jennings firearms. Bryco was named after Bruce Jennings' son, Brian, who was George's grandson. Bryco Arms was run by Janice Jennings and manufactured models based on the Jennings and Raven MP25 with Bruce's upgrades and improvements. In 2003, Bryco was the focus of a lawsuit. A 12-year-old babysitter was unloading a Bryco pistol and pulled the trigger with the round still in the firearm. He shot a 7-year-old named Brandon Mansfield in the neck. We will talk more about Brandon later, but for now, Bryco Arms was left facing a $24 million record settlement against them. Bryco Arms went bankrupt. In 2004, Paul Jimenez, who was the foreman at Bryco Arms, bought the equipment and rights to continue building the Bryco model pistols. Sundance Industries was short-lived, direct branch off the Raven Arms family tree. Sundance was owned by Stephen Jennings, who was George's nephew. And his major improvement to the Raven MP25 was a grip safety and a laser sight option. Lorcin Engineering is another big player in the ring of fire manufacturers and has only an indirect relationship with the Jennings family. Jim Waldorf started Lorcin in 1989 and produced handguns in multiple calibers from .22 long rifle to 9mm. Although Jim shared similar perspectives on producing inexpensive firearms for the masses, he did not work directly with the Jennings family on any major products. Lorcin Engineering was plagued with its share of problems, none of which helped the reputation of the ring of fire manufacturers. Theft by employees, lawsuits by customers, and lousy reviews by firearms enthusiasts all led to the eventual downfall of Lorcin Engineering. Phoenix Arms rose from the ashes of the Raven Arms factory fire, only in a different location. And although it's not easy to research, it seems that the Jennings family runs the show at Phoenix Arms. Their line of products has been reduced to 2 models, but they're still making inexpensive firearms today. And Phoenix Arms is one of the 3 remaining companies producing the original Ring of Fire products. Republic Arms, created by Jim Davis, only lasted a short time. They produced less than 1,000 Patriot 45 pistols and 45 ACP using a polymer frame. While Jim was developing the Patriot 45, Jim Waldorf started Standard Arms and later Talent Industries with his attempts at polymer-framed, inexpensive pistols, neither of which were a success. None of these 3 companies lasted more than a year. Although these last 3 companies were never included in the Ring of Fire hype that was created in the news stories in the 1990s, they are part of the Ring's lineage. Depending on how you see it, you might think companies that last only a year with experimental products which failed were pushed onto the market by greedy, uncaring capitalists wishing to make a dollar from the blood of the masses. Or alternatively, you might see entrepreneurship, new materials technology, innovation, and free market forces at work. The last 2 companies we'll focus on were never part of the Ring of Fire manufacturers. However, they are descendants of those original companies and offer their products for sale today. Cobra Enterprises purchased the machinery and design rights from Davis Industries and produces some of their pistol models along with their Derringers. Cobra also offers new models of the Talent Industries pistols. Jimenez Arms was created by Paul Jimenez in 2004 after buying the equipment and design rights from Bryco Arms. After unsuccessful safety testing in California, JA moved to Nevada. JA offers both Jennings, Bryco, and their own firearms models for sale. Well, there's a rundown of the Ring of Fire manufacturers and some of the ways they relate to each other. With the volume of information and the complex ways it interrelates to each other, it seemed beneficial to graph it in various ways. Looking at the same information from various angles helps to tell the story. Here's a chart that would have taken forever to research before we offered it here in one place. Here's the same chart laying out that relationship between the various companies' pistols. And here's much of the same information in a timeline form. Here's that same information arranged differently to show the lineages of the particular product lines. And yet another timeline with some added events for reference. We are about to talk about the media's influence on the Ring of Fire, and this timeline helps illustrate those mainstream media articles happened to occur around the introduction of the Brady Bill and the 1994 assault weapons ban. It's also a time when polymer frame pistols were being developed and coming into the market volume. We don't mean to indicate that there's a cause and effect relationship with these other events, but it is interesting to see their proximity on a calendar. This is where most of the firearm research ends, but the politics, legalities, and discussion don't stop here. Any discussion of the Ring of Fire firearms manufacturers will need to cover the topic of lawsuits. While this may not be the most interesting aspect of the Ring of Fire, and we will only briefly touch on it here, it certainly is a dramatic aspect and worthy of a closer look. Let's look at the case of Brandon Maxfield versus Bryco Arms. In 1994, when Brandon Maxfield was 7 years old, his 12-year-old babysitter shot him in the face with a Bryco pistol. This was an accident while the babysitter was attempting to unload the pistol. However, being unfamiliar with the controls of the gun, and obviously in violation of the 4 basic gun safety rules, Brandon was injured and is paralyzed from the neck down. 9 years later, after a 2-month trial, a record judgment of $24 million was granted to Brandon against Bruce Jennings, Bryco Arms, and Jennings Firearms. The verdict was entirely for compensatory damages. No punitive damages were sought. All those named in the lawsuit, along with various trusts and partnerships controlled by the Jennings and the other companies involved in the settlement, filed for bankruptcy the day after the trial. 2 years later, in 2005, the Bryco factory equipment was for sale in bankruptcy court. Paul Jimenez, the factory manager for Bryco Arms, started the bidding at $150,000. However, Brandon had waged an online campaign to raise funds in order to buy the Bryco Arms factory. Brandon raised the bidding to over $500,000. While Paul Jimenez eventually was successful and won the auction at $510,000, the inflated price was somewhat of a victory for Brandon. Now, whether or not you feel a $24 million judgment was appropriate, and no matter what side of the debate you come down on over manufacturer's liability, I think we can all agree that Brandon has been successful in his endeavors. On the other side of the debate, but still in the legal discussion, is Jason Davis, grandson of George Jennings, who worked as a firearms manufacturer and later earned his law degree from Loyola Law School. It's interesting to see how the legal fires encountered by the Ring of Fire companies have forged lawyers of their own. It's good to know that there's lawyers out there on the pro-gun side of things, too. Any comprehensive discussion of the Ring of Fire manufacturers must include the news articles of the 1990s, which created the hype and call to arms against them. These 3 articles are cited almost exclusively in any basic coverage of the topic since their initial publication 20 years ago. The first journalist to bring attention to a perceived problem with small, easily concealable, inexpensive firearms in Southern California was Alex Friedman of the Wall Street Journal in 1992. While I may not agree with her opinions, I will give her credit for putting feet on the ground, conducting interviews with the key players, and putting in the work for her story. While I may not have been able to locate the entire story verbatim, I have been able to read enough direct quotes from her story to feel as though I've read the whole thing. The second most cited reference to this subject is a 1994 research paper from the doctor who coined the term Ring of Fire. The complete text is available from multiple sources online. The doctor directly quotes much of the Alex Friedman Firepower article of 2 years prior. The 100-page-long Ring of Fire research paper goes into great detail on a myriad of subjects related to the firearms of the Ring of Fire manufacturers and how Dr. Winnemute sees their relationship to crime nationwide. In addition to the Ring of Fire research paper he is now famous for, Dr. Winnemute is a prolific author of anti-gun literature. Reading through some of his interpretations and conclusions can be very frustrating to someone who is aware of how firearms operate or anyone involved in the firearms community. Perhaps because the doctor is so far removed from the recreational use of firearms, he has a very pessimistic opinion of their use and place in society. Third, and perhaps the most viewed news source about the Ring of Fire manufacturers is the 1997 PBS Frontline episode, Hot Guns. The complete transcript of the episode is available online, as well as many interactive extra features which make learning about the subject quite interesting. However, the Frontline episode is almost completely researched from Dr. Winnemute's 1994 research paper, which is of course heavily quoted the 1982 Alex Friedman article from the Wall Street Journal. So while researching this information, I was impressed with the amount of reference that was done without further research. In fact, most sources of current information about the Ring of Fire manufacturers directly quotes one of those three articles. And as we see, these articles reference that initial research done by Alex Friedman. It would be curious to see someone follow up all these years later. I doubt we'll see an impartial follow-up anytime soon. Lastly, I will mention briefly Gun Test Magazine. It may be worthwhile to note that almost every anti-Saturday Night Special article that I've discovered in my research cites that Ring of Fire research paper, which devotes an entire section to the unreliability of these firearms, determined by reviews from Gun Test Magazine. So while I'm sure the crotchety old gun writers who published those reviews may have had nothing better to say about low-end firearms than I might have, the difference between us is I am not cited in dozens, if not hundreds, of anti-gun articles as expert testimony to the fact that these firearms are unsafe in anyone's hands. What I mean to say is be responsible for what you put out there. In conclusion, I will admit I've changed my mind on these inexpensive firearms. Just a few weeks ago, they would have never crossed my mind twice. Now I see them in a different light. I don't mean to suggest that the media hype is responsible for all their shortcomings. However, their less than favorable reputation is not 100% attributable to the people who designed them, the companies who manufactured them, the gun themselves, or the actions of the people who use them. Instead, there are some complex interactions taking place that make for some interesting research, discussion, and potentially a new area of collecting. Their place in firearms history will no doubt be an important one. Legally, if we decide these guns have no sporting use and let them be regulated out of existence, then where does that slippery slope end? Requiring manufacturers, distributors, retailers, and customers to justify why they want a product is another potential slippery slope. We urge you, don't ignore interesting facets of our firearms history. Research the facts for yourself and share them. Consider collecting these fragments of history. Where do you draw the line in the sand on what firearms are okay? Defending the Saturday Night Special is defending the right to own a non-sporting firearm. We thank you for watching our presentation of this research. Please let us know what you think. Feel free to ask questions, leave comments, or concerns. We've referenced our sources at the end of the document. We encourage you to do your own research and share it with others. You can find other information like this on our websites. We thank you for your support. And as always, thank you for watching.
That was back when I would put a quote at the end all the time. And look at all this. I have timestamps in there. This dude was putting way too much effort into this. So let's see if I can find, I think this is it. So that's a lot of guns, right? My goal was to have them in my hands, but I'm not that rich. So what I did is go after just the 22s. So this is my collection of 22s. I guess I also have a collection of 25s, but it has like 4 guns in it. So this is the real collection that I have.
Well, it all started in 1970 with this original Raven P25 25 caliber ACP pocket pistol. If you watched our video on the Ring of Fire firearms, you know that in 1970, George Jennings saw a gap in the market that was created by the 1968 Gun Control Act. The GCA banned the importation of small and expensive pocket pistols. So George decided to change his aerospace parts manufacturing company into a firearms manufacturer. He invented the 25 caliber P25 based on Browning's best pocket pistol and started what would become a very large lineage of inexpensive pistols that are the focus of many anti-gun people and unfortunately many pro-gun people. And for lots of these reasons, as I started to research these, I became more and more interested and eager to collect them. Because there's so many, I decided to stick with George Jennings' son Bruce's side of the tree and stick with the 22 calibers, which seem to be the easiest to acquire and the least expensive. We're going to talk about my collection as well as the reasons why I collect them. So let's take a look. Now we're looking at basically 11 flavors of the J22. and I believe a very complete collection. I'm missing one over here we'll talk about when we get to it. But let's go around and talk about the various pistols, and in the process, we'll explain some of the reasons why I collect them. Let's start out with the granddaddy, the P25. This is a 25 ACP. Now this one's made at the Baldwin Hills, or the Baldwin Park factory, and that only lasted for about 3 years. Then they moved to the City of Industry. The reason that's important is that's where the first J22 comes around. So this is a J22 made in Industry, or City of Industry, California. California is written out. We see that there's a pirate. It says Jennings Firearms Inc. We've got a slide safety. Got the serial number on the back of the frame, and it's marked model J22. 22 caliber long rifles all written out. This one's in like a chrome wood grip. I'm not certain if this original version came in a different style or not. But this one is one of the most rare. I've only seen one of these so far. Now, most of the original Jennings J22s came from this, or more like this one, it came from Chino, California. Now, again, California is written out. We see the pirate, Jennings Firearms Inc. We still have the slide safety, serial number on the back, still marked model J22, everything written out. Difference on this one is this one has a black finish with what we call the black checkered grip. Now, I don't have too many duplicates, but this one's sort of a duplicate. It's exactly the same as far as the markings and the mechanics. It's just that this one's in chrome with a wood grip. Now, looking at this one, you might think, well, that's exactly the same. We got the pirate logo, we have Jennings Firearms Inc., we have the slide safety, Chino, California, marked model J22. However, the difference here as a collector is we see that it's marked Calwesco on the back of the frame, along with the serial number. If we look back at the family tree, we see that in 1985, Jennings Firearms sort of merged into Calwesco, and we go into that more detail in the original Ring of Fire video. But what we think as collectors is that they were using up their parts from that original factory, or from that original Jennings Firearms, and they had to mark them Calwesco, so they did it on the frame as an afterthought. Now, once they used up all those parts, they retooled, and now the frames have the pirate logo, Jennings Firearms Inc., but now they say by Calwesco, Chino, California. We now see California is abbreviated. We still have the slide safety, we have the serial number on the back, and there's still marked model J25, 22 long rifle, all written out. Again, another similar one, but I have this one intentionally. Again, marked all the same. The only real difference here is we have the black checkered grip and the black finish. The reason I have this one in the collection, though, is to compare with this one, which is also Calwesco, but notice now it's Irvine, California, as opposed to Chino. So they moved factories. When they did that, they changed the grip style. They also changed safety from the slide safety to the switch. We still have now we have the serial number on the frame here, and it's now marked Jennings J22. 22 long rifles no longer written out. So that was one of the first major changes in the style and the mechanics of the pistol. Later, we have, one of my most rare pieces in the collection. This one's marked Calwesco, again, Irvine, California, but no Jennings Pirate, no Jennings Firearms Inc. On this side, it is marked Jennings J22, 22 long rifle abbreviated, and our serial number is on the back of the frame. Jumping back to the family tree, we'll jump over to the daughter's side. So George's daughter and her husband, which was one of the guys that worked at Raven Arms, started Davis Industries. His brother John had worked at Raven Arms, moved over to Davis Industries, but in 1987 decided to start his own company called Citgo, and he built a 22 caliber pistol that was designed to compete with the Jennings pistol. He was sued out of existence in just a year by both his brother and the family. However, I think it's worth having it in the collection. And here's a Citgo SP22. Now you can see some similarities there. The real only differences I see on the outside of the safety is a little bit different in shape, of course, and then it uses a channel size or channel type sight. Inherently unreliable, but again, it has a place in this collection only because of its involvement with the family. Going back to the family tree, we see that in 1989, Calwesco kind of merged to become Bryco Arms. And again, we go into more detail on that on the big video. But mechanically, we see that the Jennings Firearms Inc. by Cal Westco in Irvine, California, and this Jennings Firearms No More Inc. by Bryco, Irvine, California. Very, very similar. They both have the same safeties, they both have the same grips, and they're both marked Jennings J22 with 22 long rifle, abbreviated. I should mention too that in all this time they've always had a cocking indicator in the back, which is basically just a pin that you can see through the hole there. The reason I bring that up is the next one in the line we see is Bryco Arms. They moved to Costa Mesa, California. They dropped the Jennings Pirate and the Jennings Firearms. Still have the slide safety, the same grips, serial number on the back, marked Jennings J22-CA on this one. And this one has a bright orange cocking indicator. Basically just opened up the hole and put a little rubber thing around the pin. Makes it a little easier to see, and I believe that was a requirement in California at the time. Jumping back to the family tree, we see that in 2004, Bryco Arms was sued out of existence with a $24 million lawsuit. Again, we go into more detail on that in the big video, but that resulted in the company being sold to Jimenez Arms, again, Costa Mesa, California, just like the Bryco. In fact, these firearms are almost identical, except for the engraving on the slide. It went from a Jennings J22 to a J822. Now, they were originally in Costa Mesa, California. We mentioned the lawsuit that put Bryco out of business. That same lawyer kept after the company and eventually just ran them out of California. They went to Nevada. I talked about missing one. That's one that's marked Henderson, Nevada. I don't have that one yet, but this is the final result. Jimenez Arms marked Las Vegas, Nevada, and J822. So this is the most modern version of the J22s and available, on GunBroker at some stores. You're going to pay about $120 for these or so. And then finally, a culmination of the collection. We started with the Raven P25. Now there were 4 models of the Raven until 1991 when the factory burned down. Because of the fire, they started a new company called Phoenix, and Phoenix originally made a Raven model for a few years, and then switched over to make a 22 caliber version called the HP22. And if we look at them, you can see some some differences, but you can also see some similarities here. So we start off with the granddaddy. We end up with, a younger cousin to that original Jennings J22, and we have the HP22. So I've talked a little bit about the reasons why I collect these and shown you some of the different examples here. I hope that I've encouraged at least someone out there to think about firearms collecting. Whether or not you like these little cheap junk guns, that's up to you. But there's lots of stuff to experience out there in the world of firearms collecting, and I definitely encourage you to at least look into it, if not sink a little money into it. Now for me, I've sold a couple of high-end handguns that I never used too much to buy this collection, and I'm not at all disappointed in that. I've had a lot of fun acquiring these. I've met a lot of new friends that collect these as well, and I'm really enjoying it. So we're having a lot of fun shooting these and playing with them and researching them. Hope this has been an interesting video. We look forward to the discussion in the comments. As always, thanks for watching.
So this is the jerk doctor quote from that guy in 1994. Make a public tour of the Ring of Fire. Invite community leaders, aggrieved persons, representatives of the law enforcement and medical communities, and the press. Travel in a caravan of ambulances, involved injured persons and their families or survivors as advocates. Consider the example set by the families of the Desaparecidos in Chile and Argentina who shared with the world the faces and the stories of their loved ones. So I'm not sure what that last part is referencing, but this guy wants to parade the grieving and surviving relatives of victims of gun or violence that was with a firearm. He wants those people to parade around in ambulances. So this guy, the doctor who created the term Ring of Fire, was desperate. He's a gunophobe or whatever it's called, hopalophobe. He's desperately afraid of firearms. He has attempted to sue the companies, and he attempted to make them a public health hazard. So I don't know that he's integral, but he's certainly a test bed. He's certainly a prototype, or he's certainly like something that I'm sure that they used for research when they come up with their national level and some of the other state level stuff. So this guy's a real jerk. But the thing about taking a tour of the factories, he created this concept of the Ring of Fire because of the factory's location physically around town. If we go back to the other video, and if I can try to find somewhere towards the beginning of the video, we start to talk about the physical location of those factories in Los Angeles. They're in a crescent shape around the perimeter of the town, just like all the other manufacturing areas are in Los Angeles. And you have to kind of reach to consider it a crescent, because it's really just a whole bunch of them right back and forth on this main drag on I-10. And then there's two of them down here on either side of this mountain, and one of them way up here in whatever that's called up there. So kind of tough to call it a perimeter, but he's reaching. The Ring of Fire is the volcanoes around the Pacific Ocean. So this guy's suggesting in this quote that this doctor, he's suggesting that people make a tour. Well, guess what? In 1990, in 2018, me and Smeggy, he's not out here right now, but me and Smeggy, I drove my van down to San Diego. Smeggy was down there doing something. So together we drove up and hit this one, which is Sedco, the weird looking gun that got sued out of existence after a really long time. We went up from San Diego and hit that one in Lake Elsinore. We saw that one first. We saw a couple of more on our way over to LA. We hung out with a guy who's no longer into guns anymore, but back then he was interested in guns and let us hang out at his place. And then the next morning, that night, we drove with him and his wife down to these two, Calwesco and Bryco. So we saw two factories down there that evening. And then we came up, spent the night, and then headed up to see Sundance. On the way back from Sundance, we saw the place where the Terminator gun shop and the surplus store from the movie Falling Down, and stopped at a couple other places. And then we headed east and we checked out all the rest of these factories. So I can tell you, I've been to all of those factories, and you don't go to all of those factories in a day. And even though this guy's calling for it, it's all hyperbole, it's all fancy, it's all fake. It's because we know how long it took. We did that drive, and it's not possible. Even if you take out all the outliers and you just go up and down in a straight line, somehow consider that a ring of fire, BS. It still takes forever. Even if you didn't have traffic and you flew around in ambulance helicopters, it would take for a long time, and it would cost a tremendous amount of money. And if you drove around in actual ambulances, think of the tremendous waste of resources. And that's a doctor recommending it. So shame on him. I don't even know if he's still alive. He's a big jerk. And he started all that anti-war or anti-gun stuff focused on health crisis crap. And that was because he was thwarted with going after the financial responsibility of the manufacturers. And that's because he's thwarted from other avenues. So we have a few persistent individuals that go after guns, and that's one of the other aspects of the whole Ring of Fire thing that's neat. So so the guy recommended going around in an ambulance. I was this close to owning an ambulance. I mean, not because of this guy. For other reasons, I really wanted to do the gun show loophole tour in an ambulance. I thought that'd be a great vehicle for the trip. I just could never afford to buy an ambulance that was, the right condition to be able to take a long road trip in. But we almost took him up on a stupid challenge, minus exploiting victims, of course. And we have been to all these factories as part of the tour. Somewhere in here, there's probably links to all the different videos that we've done on the Ring of Fire collection. In addition to just showing it off, we do shoot them, or I did shoot them back in the day, some of them on video. We've got videos at all those different factories, and then digging into other aspects. There's so many aspects that the Ring of Fire stuff digs into legal and Second Amendment. Holy moly, it gets into how firearms are persecuted, marginalized firearms, not just the owners, but firearms themselves. If you get into the 1968 import stuff, a lot of that has to do with industry and industry's role in legal stuff and attitudes, and yeah, it's interesting stuff. So I was just going to watch the one video, and I figured I might as well. I'm waiting for Foss, who was in here earlier. Let's see if we go up and highlight this dude. This dude is heading out of here because he is got a show coming up. I'll link to that if you happen to be watching this in the middle of the night. You can still go over there and watch his show coming up live for people that are up overnight. Otherwise, I have had comments up over here on the side of the screen. Oh, interesting. Interesting. Gary is saying he's the director of the University of California Firearms Violence Research Center, established in 2017. So that's super interesting. This guy is still out there and not liking firearms. So this one is, you've been saying some stuff. Let me go find your first one. So I guess you were saying, you know, it's hard to know with the lag and everything. You're probably talking about the Raven, whatever, I forget the model, whatever, Phoenix Arms, I mean. 22, looks kind of like a PPK. I kind of thought that too at first. That's what started this whole thing. I don't know if I mentioned it in any of the videos, but I was sitting there at the range doing a typical gun review like I used to do. This is one of the things that got me to quit doing regular gun reviews. So I was doing this regular gun review, and I was about to do a bad gun review on this gun because it's so stupid. It's got a grip safety. No, it doesn't. It has a regular safety, it has a slide safety, and it has a magazine disconnect safety. So there's 3 safeties. It's also additionally got a loaded chamber indicator, which is just a fragile little thing on an inexpensive gun. So I was just frustrated that it had a magazine safety to begin with, because that's just a stupid thing to put on a semi-auto 22, a tiny little gun. It's just an unneeded little thing. And then it had 2 safeties, and no gun has 2 safeties, like a safety for the gun itself on the frame and then a safety on the slide. Like, I don't know what that is, a firing pin safety or something. And because of the way the 3 things operated, the manual of arms for that gun is basically unique, or at least it's very complicated, and there's got to be very few firearms that are that complicated because of it. It would be like having an extra safety brake or something on your car. It's not that it's difficult, you just have to remember to always do it. And if you do them in the wrong order, they kind of lock up on you. So it's just a nuisance. And I was thinking, why would anybody do this? And then I thought to myself, why would anybody do this? And as soon as I started to look into it, I found this rabbit hole, and I started to research. I started doing that on a Thursday. This was back in 2012. I was making real money on YouTube. And well, technically, I just was getting back from a road trip, and I was happy to be able to get back on a computer and do some stuff. And remember this, think about when this was. September 12 is when I posted this. So I was doing this research a little bit before then. It was a different world pre, the end of 2012. So I sat down to do some research, to do a review, and I ended up doing research. I came up for air on Sunday. I literally just spent 3 days digging, and I couldn't believe that it was everything I was finding was like frontline says. I went and watched Frontline, and all it says is everything cites this doctor. And I'm like, what the hell? So everything comes from this doctor? And then everything from the doctor came from that one girl. And I'm like, what the hell? Every single thing that's ever been said is everybody pointing at the next row down. And I'm sure this happens all over the place. But it was fascinating to me to find that literally everything written, everything, everywhere, both sides really, because there's not too much written on our side really. So just about everything written was citing these few articles. And it was driving me nuts that only one lady ever put her feet on the ground and talked to these people. Luckily, she kind of did while they were all still around. But, the companies dissolved and changed and blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't possible afterwards, but still nobody even bothered, because now the guns are just marginalized. They're bad. And, here's all the reasons why they suck and everything. And unfortunately, Lorcin is horrible. So he ruined it for everybody. Jennings, the son, is a horrible individual, one of the worst people in our industry, worst people on the planet. I'm embarrassed to have him as a human, horrible person. And Lorcin's just an asshole. So yeah, it's not like these people are all great people, but I don't think all of them are. In fact, I'm almost positive most of them are just normal people making guns and making an inexpensive gun for people that want to buy a gun that's closer to a fire extinguisher than a fine work of art. And sometimes you just need a crowbar. You don't need fancy engraved apparatus, right? Sometimes you just need a crowbar for the shed or for the snowmobile or for the, I don't know, the bait shop, or I don't know what you might need a firearm for, making noise or bringing the kids in from, the ranch or something. You're just shooting into sand. Grandma don't need nothing more than a Jennings or whatever. So people might marginalize it and say that guns are only for weapons, and if there's a cheap gun, it's for criminals. But F all that. This is a great opportunity. The Ravens, the Jennings, Cal Wesco's, the others that you're never going to get a hold of, the Brycos, are all great firearms to have, and you give that to somebody and you ask them their opinion of it. I can tell you from experience, you put a J22 in somebody's hands and you're going to get different reactions from people. Different than a 1911. You put a 1911 in people's hands and it's a different opinion. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's a thing. It's the middle of the night, so we're just kind of riffing. An equalizer, yeah. And again, it's not. I mean, it would be awesome if these were little Glocks. It would have been awesome if Glock was available back then, and it was like $100 to make, because these are lacking one thing, and that's reliability. And I mean, that's another factor of it, but it's not a bad thing necessarily. We obviously are still here, but yeah, that's the one I'm missing, dude. You got to rub that in. There's one missing there, and I didn't really mention it in the video, but it's that one. I never was able to get one. So if anybody knows where to get a slide, that's the only thing I'm missing. So yeah, Numeric made a fancy slide for some reason. Jerks. And all the collectors have them, and they won't give me one. Just to make my collection incomplete. They're just out to get me. Let's see, I just bought a Bryco 3. There's no excuse to buy one now. You can only buy broken ones and be cool. Buying a real one, you're not even a gun person anymore. No, you're just you're a sucker. I just bought a Bryco 380 to replace one I had a long time ago. First gun I ever bought. Oh, well, in that case, you're allowed to buy it. I have a laser 25. And if you're the person that keeps asking me about the battery, I don't know, dude. It's in a box with the other ones in my safe. So it's not something I get out very often. But yeah, do have a laser 25. I found mine at a gun show. It is not on the table because it's a 25 ACP. I do have a couple of 25s. I don't think I've ever done a video on the 25s. And that would be where, how do I get back to my channel from here? Here? Let me see. It's called a laser boa. So first I'll try laser and see if it comes up, because that's such an awesome thing. It might show up at the top of the list. No, it's not showing up. I know I probably did a video of it though. So now we'll put in laser boa. I think it was boa. What did boa mean? So I think all you're going to get is the other, I guess. What the hell is
Taking another look at the Serenite Special Collection, this time, well, specifically the Ring of Fire, but this time we're going to take a look at...
Okay, so I guess that's all the 25s laid out on a table with everything else. So if you think about the graphic I made and how it's laid out, this is the actual guns laid out that way. Dang, I forgot I did this. I wonder if I got a picture of this somewhere. And these are 22s, and there's the boa that's 25, and of course the different Ravens are 25s. But this is basically the whole family tree with the Lorcin. The Sedco would be over there, and the Davis, and then Davis, and then Cobra revolver sets. I think I got them in 22, and I think I've already sold these off. These were, one of them was a 9, and one of them was a 38. Yeah, it's kind of neat. So, yeah, you're not that person. Somebody keeps asking me about the battery on it, and I don't know. It's underneath the grip panel probably, but that's the laser boa right there. I think in this video,
one of the sub branches. So seen in other videos, the main branch of the family tree is George Jennings and the Raven, which turned into Phoenix. Then we've got this side of the family tree, which was his son Bruce. That goes off.
I made this video in 2019. Or no, I reposted this in 2019. I don't remember making this video.
Then the Jennings, Bryco, Calwesco, and then Jimenez. Over here, we've got the daughter side. So Georgia, Arlington, Valencia, California. They're all chromed out, so it's going to be tough to keep them in focus here.
If you've ever heard of Allen Anchor, the place where you can buy stuff at, let me get a commercial for them in case you've never heard of Allen Anchor.
We would like to say thank you to owlandanchor.com for great two-way items like these. Go to owlandanchor.com and place an order today.
So that organization is very close to this place, from what I remember. FYI. All right, I have several Roams and an RG14. Yeah, that would be a whole nother video. Very, very, very similar though, and it would be super cool to see somebody put some time into that video, because I suspect everything that I got going on with info on these is really similar on that side, only you remove the 1968 Gun Control Act creating the whole phenomenon to the 1968 Gun Control Act being in the middle of the whole phenomenon. And that's the part I don't know. Somewhere along the line, RG or Rome or the other one or whoever it was first, was important. Or Rome or whatever the other one is, and then they just started manufacturing everything here. So they completely complied with the law, and we have just as many of those Romes as we got anything else. This is a completely different gun. That's a real one, so that's different. They're all little, and they often get confused with decent guns, but these are, I don't even know if these are Volkswagen Bugs of guns. Like these are, what was that one car? These are like the Yugos of cars. Like they're there and they can work for a while, and sometimes they'll be good for you, but you wouldn't want to use them to haul cement around, or big fat people, or a big dog, or bowling balls, or anything heavy. All right, well, with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to encourage you in about a half of an hour to go over and watch this guy's chat, which he'll be doing stuff about music. He's talking about music tonight. That's an overnight. How come it won't give me the regular view anymore? What's up with that? It's only giving me this weird view now. Great. So anyway, you can go watch that, and otherwise, leave comments if you're watching this in the future. Just we're actually planning to watch the one video because I hadn't watched it in a while, and I had sort of a question about something in it, and I just, instead of fast forwarding through it, I figured I'd watch it. Figured I'd go live. Turned out a bunch of people were around to hang out, so thanks for the chat. We will be back to pick you up later. I will end it with this one because Gizzard goes live here in the morning. I don't know why he's still awake. I guess he's allowed to be. He'll be live here in a few hours doing a live format show focused on guns and often Second Amendment. Thank you for supporting our projects. If you'd like to buy us a cup of coffee, check out our Patreon channel.
The guys and gals of gunwebsites.com encourage you to take a CCW class every year, practice at least once a month, and carry every day. Thank you for watching gunwebsites.com.
I always want to give me a gizzard recipe. Seriously? I gotta click on this many links? Seriously? Does it have me unsubscribed? Why does it have me unsubscribed to everybody? Ain't I a channel member? Stupid YouTube. That's censorship right there. censorship.